2. Chat room, just let me know if it sounds okay. Feels like we haven't done one of these in the basement for a while. It's either been in the garage or Hamilton Walkers, any of those places, so which is great. We've had a lot of fun the last week, so let's get to it. It is the 200 level, Mike Carpenter in the basement studio for the first time in what seems like forever. It's been a whirlwind week and a half. The book is out. The book release event at Hamilton Walkers was a big success. Lante helped me with that. And then D. Brown makes the surprise appearance at the end of it, and I'll talk about that in a bit. But now that the book is out, it's nice to kind of settle back into things and get back into football and what I think is still a pretty good Illini football team. And it's amazing how a bye week can seem like an eternity. Like we haven't seen this team on the field in a month. Well, in actuality, it's only been just over a week since they lost at Penn State. And just that absence makes you forget that, hey, we were doing pretty well beforehand. At least for me, that immediacy isn't there. So when I walk into the stadium on Saturday, albeit against a pretty bad Purdue team, I'll still have that little bit of anxiety, nerves about, oh, wait, are we still good? Or was that a mirage? I don't think what we saw in the first 5 weeks was a mirage. And I also don't think we're under any presumption that this is some great team. Not to say that they don't have a higher ceiling than we maybe thought. But I do think that the floor is certainly higher and that we can look at this team and say, hey, they're just pretty good. And I wrote that after the Central Michigan game. And I know Substack has been quiet and I haven't written as many columns. I'll try to get back to that. But I think even after the Nebraska win, that point still kind of holds. I'm not going to go so far as to say this is college football playoff caliber team because I don't know if they are. I don't, in my heart, think that's the case. But I don't need them to be that. I just need them to be a team that, one, makes a bowl game, and two, now that they have an opportunity to have a sneaky good year to the tune of an 8-4 record, why not do it? And it's right there in front of them. And a really good opportunity on Saturday against Purdue to go to 5-1 against a really bad team, and in the process, get a little bit of revenge. We're going to get to football in a bit. Just real quick, going to recap the week that was with the book coming out. And for someone that's a townie like myself, it was a treat to make the rounds and meet with some local legends. So I'll tell you a few of the highlights from last week. One of them was meeting with Brian Barnhart and doing a segment of Penny for Your Thoughts. I was on there for a good 20 minutes. Very gracious with his time. And the guy is a complete pro. And that goes without saying. Anyone that's listened to Brian knows that. But meeting him in person and seeing how he kind of operates, I just appreciated that level of professionalism. And it was really cool to be on a show that's been an institution with local listeners for decades. My grandparents, for example, when it was Jim Turpin, they listened to Penny, I'm pretty sure, every day. So while they're no longer around, it was hard for me to not think about my grandparents and how they always had 1400 on. Even my grandpa would sometimes have it on through Rush Limbaugh. That's all right, Grandpa, you do you. But they weren't around in order for to see this. So for me, it was a cool kind of full circle moment for someone that is truly embedded as a lifelong townie to be on that show. Sportsline Saturday with Lauren and Steve was another treat as well. Thursday night at Hamilton Walkers was a great time, surrounded by friends and family and some listeners of the podcast. We were in the front room, had about 25 people out there probably, and we're closing out the podcast, and Lon and I, and it's captured on video, as I'd gotten done with the sponsors. We were ready to sign out, say hello to everybody after the show, and then we see D. Brown in the back of the bar. And he had a golf outing that day, so he had popped in there for a drink before he went back, I presume, to one of the hotels in downtown Champaign. And we just asked, hey, can you come on? Listen, D doesn't know a stranger, and he certainly will never say no to a microphone. He's got that kind of personality. So it was a treat to end that podcast talking to D. Brown, sharing with him a story from when I was a senior in high school and hung out with D and Darren and Luther in their apartment complex at D's apartment. And D laughed and said, oh, I didn't know you guys were in high school. I said, no, it's all good. It wasn't, everything was above board. It was too early for even partying to have started. They were waiting, I'm sure, for some people to come over. What I didn't tell him, and it's in the book though, was that when we left the apartment complex, because they had asked us nicely, "Hey guys, we're gonna get ready to go out and stuff." So we dipped, and on our way out, we saw these gorgeous co-eds basically walking up the stairs as we were walking out, and we're like, "Okay, we get the point. You guys have ladies coming over. We get it. You're the number one basketball team in the nation. That's only fair." I didn't mention that in person, but if D does in fact read the book, and I gave him a copy, he will get to that point and probably laugh. I'm sure he had a great time in college. When you're D Brown, you should have a great time when you're in college. So that was a trip, and I mean, what are the odds? Just at pure serendipity that he happened to pop in, and even after the show was talking with him and Lon about how he's walking down Neal Street in downtown Champaign, and he spots kind of a crowd in Hamilton Walkers, and he said, for some reason, I was just like, I want to go back there. I want to go there to have a drink out of all the places in downtown Champaign that he could have. And what are the odds that there just happened to be an Illini basketball book event at the same time? So that was cool, completely unplanned. At first, I thought maybe Lon had planted it, but Lon would have copped to something like that. So now that the book is out, I hope that, those that have it are enjoying it, and there's a sense of relief now that it's out there and the media appearances are done. And I had an article in the News Gazette today that Bob Osmussen wrote about me in another Illini book that came out about Red Grange, and I appreciate the local media for being so grateful with their time. Heather Roberts at WCIA, trying to think who else, Lon and Derek for letting me hop on their show, Stevie and Diane for their show, and for you, the listeners, and all the supporters. And we're already getting a great response on Amazon. And just like I figured, if you type in Illini book to Amazon, we're the first one to show up because there's just not many Illini books. So if you haven't got it already, that's an easy way to do it. And if you are local, Game Day Spirit, Jane Addams Bookstore, and The Lit in downtown Champaign, in Ford County, Game Changer Sports Shop as well. So let's hit the sponsors real quick, dig back into Illini football. And before I get too far ahead of myself, a reminder that the 200 level is brought to you by Hamilton Walkers in downtown Champaign. Steak, Seafood, and Spirits. They were a great host for our book event. And what I got right before was on their specials menu, they had striped bass. I love fish. Karen and I had been there earlier that week for our anniversary, and I got a filet mignon. It was 10 out of 10. But I said, let's try some fish. It is one of the best meals I've ever had. Every single bite, I just sort of shake my head and say, good God, this is really good. Washed it down with their patented old-fashioned. And I asked the bartender, what's the bourbon in yours again? Because that, to me, is the difference. It's Buffalo Trace, which is a great old-fashioned bourbon. And the people that came out, it was cool to see the mix of comfort plates. Some people would just get a hamburger and fries. Some people were getting more upscale, whether it be the fish special I got. I saw someone get the Twin Petite steaks. And the family-style sides are an excellent way to share amongst the table. That's Hamilton Walkers in downtown Champaign. Also, State Farm agent Brian Hansen online at brianismyguy.com. For life, auto, home, business, renters, you name it, Brian is my guy, and he can be your guy as well at brianismyguy.com. Also got to thank Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend. And if you can believe it, it's time to get that furnace checked. It is that time. Next week, there will be lows into the 30s, into the low 30s on Tuesday and Wednesday. So the time is now to schedule your furnace check. So to do that, call 217-841-4728 for Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend. And finally, Owen Builders LLC, online at owenbuildersllc.com. Luke and his wife came out on Thursday. I appreciate that, Luke. And it was good to see you guys again. For contracting work, you can check out a gallery online of the many kind of home projects that they can do. And you can get a free quote as well at owenbuildersllc.com. Got to thank Champagne Showers Podcast Network and, of course, you, the listener. And for the few people popping in on this, what is it, Tuesday late afternoon. Got done with school, went for a run, and then thought, let's do a pod. It's been a while. Now, quick thing about my personal schedule coming up. Game is on Saturday against Purdue, 2:30. Perfect time. Is there a better time than that? Same with Michigan, 2:30. Chef's kiss. I will not have a post-Purdue podcast because I'm going to Cancun on Sunday. My wife and I are taking a trip. So that means next Friday morning, we will do an Illini Michigan podcast. So I do apologize for that break in what is going to be a huge week. Now, the good news is there is no dearth of Illini material, whether it's the Illini Inquirer podcast, whether it is what Robert's throwing out there on Illini board, Tame Piper. We have an embarrassment of riches with Illini football coverage, so I think that you will manage without me for a week. And I got to be honest, though, even though I'll be in Cancun, if we do what we need to against Purdue, yeah, I'm going to be thinking about the Michigan game a lot. And we do have a monster tailgate that we're setting up for that, and it's just going to be an absolute blast. So look at this. Here we are in early going into mid-October with 2 straight home games at 2:30, 4-1, and a chance to go 5-1 this weekend if you take care of business and set up a massive game, 100th anniversary against Michigan. Now, I am going to exercise caution in this because there is no such thing as a guaranteed win. And I'll talk about Michigan next week. And we'll think about Michigan next week. I want to talk about Purdue and specifically this notion, understandable, that a lot of Illini fans have that, well, listen, Purdue, they've done this before where they've beaten us when maybe they shouldn't have. And I suppose there are moments where that is true. You can go back 2 years ago specifically. That's a game at home that you have to win. And if you win, you go to Indy for the Big Ten title game. You didn't. It was one of the most frustrating days in my Illini sports life. It just was. And I think for many of you too. Now, I do want to caution people, though, when we talk about these games that we've lost to Purdue, that is the rare exception where Illinois has been a good team themselves, yet still lost to Purdue. Because most of the examples of the last, 7 out of the last 8, most of those Illini teams weren't all that great. Last year's Illini team, especially at the time they played Purdue, wasn't great. Now, Purdue wasn't good either, but they were early enough in the Ryan Walters era where I guess there was still a little bit of a shine there, and the game got away from us. 3 years ago, Bret Bielema's first season, Illinois had no offense to speak of. Defense was starting to round into shape, but Purdue won late because you were just a little bit too uber conservative with your play calling, and that was an early example of Bielema ball that didn't work, right? It didn't get you over that hump. There were other frustrating games. The one win that you did have was Lovie Smith's bowl team that went into Purdue the week after beating Wisconsin at home on a rainy Saturday, and he beat them 20-6 or something like that in a 2.5-hour football game where you were just running the ball on them. They couldn't do anything offensively. It was actually kind of a joy to watch. And after the Wisconsin game, which could have been a fluke in and up, like on its own, a fluke, that Purdue game felt like, wait a second, maybe Lovie's turned a corner. Of course, he didn't, but that Illini team was fine, and that Purdue team was meh. Okay, you beat them, right? It just goes to show, point being, there's no hex. There's no curse. I don't believe in those things anyways. And the mental component of this game, I understand why, for Illini fans, we're a little bit gun-shy. We can look at all the metrics to say this Purdue team is playing awful football, which they are in almost every measurable way. And yet, we see the Purdue on the TV screen or the big P on their helmet and say, well, wait a second. It also doesn't help, I think, that it's Ryan Walters on the sideline. If it's Darrell Hazel, I don't think we're worrying about any of this. But it's the idea that we could perhaps lose to Ryan Walters and this Purdue team, led by your former defensive coordinator, that would make it a disaster of almost biblical proportions. So there is that, and there's also the fact that we're Illinois football. We cannot take anything for granted based on our history. But the 7 out of 8 that Purdue have won have usually come at the hands of Purdue teams better than you. I'll give you an example. Back in 2017, was it 2018? I believe 2018 at home, the A.J. Bush-led Illini that ended up going 4-8 that year. Not very good, clearly. Purdue came into town, and it's like, well, hey, this is an opportunity, I think, at that point to go 3-2 or 4-3, or get to 500, something to look like you were halfway relevant, and maybe Lovie was starting to turn the page a little bit. Well, Purdue came in here and just absolutely smacked you around. Well, that Purdue team was pretty good. You were not good. So I can't really lump that in with this notion of Purdue owns you. That was a better team beating a worse team. Remove the jerseys, it doesn't really matter that it was Purdue. So I guess what I'm saying is, losing 7 of 8 to Purdue has a lot more to with you being a bad football program than it does any idea that Purdue has some supernatural hold over you. It just, I don't buy that. Furthermore, if we were to flip the intangible arguments of this game and how we feel as a fan base, I want to focus on a few of the positive things that are going into this game that are intangible, including the revenge game narrative, which for Bret Bielema has worked out pretty spectacularly, except for Purdue. Now, I think sometimes timing is everything, right? Where you get enough bites at the apple, eventually you'll get that big win that you've been missing. And for Bret Bielema, for whatever reason, that big missing piece has been Purdue. It's kept you from 2 bowl games and a Big Ten title game. So I would imagine that no matter what he's saying at the press conference, which was pretty measured on Monday, and no matter what he's saying to his team, which I would imagine is a little bit less measured, this is a game that he wants to win as badly as any on the schedule, including the Michigan game next week. And I would even argue that Bret Bielema, if you asked him which game do you want to win more, he would honestly reply Purdue. Even with as bad as Purdue has played, I don't think that's changed. I would imagine going into the season, the 2 games that he circled the most, Kansas in the non-conference and Purdue in conference play. So if we look at how the Kansas game was able to flip on its head from what happened last year in Lawrence, and you beat them at home, and yes, I know Kansas is 1-4, or they 1-5, I think 1-4. They aren't as bad as their record, but clearly that's a team that's a mess right now. I don't think that takes away from where you both were at week 2 and the importance of that win and how it's propelled you to a 4-1 start along with the win at Nebraska. Those are 2 games that could have gone either way, but you got it done early in the season as you were improving yourself. Now, imagine if this Purdue game flips to the same degree that that Kansas game did from last season's result to this year. And if that's the case, you're looking at 2 games that you lost on the road by 20-some points, and then you come home and you get the win. Now, I would argue, though, that beating Purdue by 6 points, that wouldn't feel so good. I mean, I'll take a win. Listen, I'll take a win by a point. I don't care. Just get to 5-1. We're still at a point as a program where you take a win regardless of style points. But I get a feeling, and Vegas would agree, that it's going to be more than 6. That this is a game where you have an opportunity to look great on both sides of the ball. It's funny because as a fan, I've been kind of wavering between, all right, I think we're going to be fine. You know, we'll get it done. And wait a second. Of course we're going to get it done. And we're going to look good doing it. And I'm starting to sit a little bit more in the latter because of the positives we've seen this year. Let's start with some of the obvious ones. You're getting good quarterback play. And when there's not an opposing defensive line like Penn State that you're going against, this offensive line is keeping him upright and letting him make throws. Well, I would imagine that continues against Purdue. So if that is the case, and Luke Altmaier stays upright, I see no reason he's not going to be every bit as good, if not a little bit better, than he was against Nebraska. And this Purdue defense is no Nebraska defense. Not in terms of talent, not in terms of their defensive front. Markevius Brown, he's already gone. They are in a really, really bad place right now defensively. And that their identity of man-to-man in the secondary is not really conducive to stopping Zachary Franklin and Pat Bryant. Good luck with that if you want to go single coverage on those guys outside. You keep Luke up long enough, he should be able to pick apart the outside cornerbacks, I would imagine. So there's the quarterback thing. I think there's line play, which the big bugaboo with Penn State and why it felt like it was so tenuous from the start. Well, after the 7-0 start for Illinois, you started to see Penn State's fronts dominate. That's Penn State. I imagine that against Oregon, we'll see some of those same things, and they can be a little bit frustrating, a little bit disheartening. I imagine even parts in the Michigan game, which say what you want about their quarterback position, but they still have strong lines. And we might see some weaknesses in that game as well. But I just feel like when you are not overmatched on the lines, Bret Bielema coach teams are going to have an advantage more often than not. Now, that sounds blatantly obvious. Oh, wow, you got an advantage on the offensive and defensive lines. You should win the game. Well, all I'm saying that tends to lead directly into the kind of ball game that Bret Bielema wins more often than not. Another thing, too, your defensive secondary against this Purdue offense, which has struggled enough passing the ball. But when you can afford, with this defensive secondary, to just kind of go straight up in the defensive backfield, that allows your front seven, whatever group that may be as far as personnel is concerned, to really key in on the one guy that worries me with Purdue, Devin Mockabee. And I say that from what happened last year at home. 2 years ago, when Devin Mockabee, freshman walk-on, ran for like 150 yards. You couldn't bring him down. It was incredibly frustrating. It was disheartening. I'm sure he's a nice guy. Clearly, he worked really hard to become a walk-on, now scholarship running back who's really good at his job. That's the guy that worries me, that Purdue could somehow lull you to sleep. And Devin Mockabee, who is still getting about 5 yards a carry this year, has a good game. But I think what does help your case here is that Hudson Card and his ragtag group of wide receivers, which aren't doing a whole lot, you feel like you can go straight up in the defensive secondary with 5 guys. Then that would leave a front 6. Let me rephrase. Your 5 guys, I think that allows Matthew Bailey to creep up a little bit, and let's call that a front 7. To me, if Devin Mockabee doesn't really get going and your defensive secondary continues to play as well as it has, which it still played well at Penn State, this Purdue rushing attack is not Penn State. It's not Singleton. It's not the other one, Katron Turner, I think was the guy's name. No. So that, to me, is your recipe right there for just winning the game. But then there's the intangible factors going against Purdue. I talked about what's working for Illinois, and I think it's the revenge game factor. And that Bret Bielema's record in those is phenomenal, minus Purdue. So let's say what Harry Black would say. We're due to change fortunes in that. Flip it around with what Purdue is going through right now. Now, a wounded dog, isn't there some saying about that? You know, the danger of a wounded dog. And maybe Michigan State 2 years ago, you feel a little bit that as an Illini fan thinking, we've had teams come in here down before. And then for whatever reason, they just they galvanize on their sideline and they come together at the worst possible time for us. Well, keep in mind that Michigan State team was still a year removed from a 10-win season with Kenneth Walker, and they still had some dudes on it that Purdue simply does not have. And as much as I hated losing to Mel Tucker, he hadn't lost the locker room. There's a chance that Purdue has checked out. If you watch Ryan Walters' press conference this week, it was not even fun. I've enjoyed a bit of the schadenfreude of watching Purdue stink. I've enjoyed a little bit of Ryan Walters and his sort of swaggering demeanor, especially after he got a Hudson Card and last year, and his bulging biceps on the sidelines, and it's too cool for school, chewing gum. I'm the young, cool guy. Listen, if he's my defensive coordinator, I'm not really caring about any of those things, admittedly, but he's not. He's Purdue's coach. Screw that. I don't like it. All of that's gone. There's no facade anymore. He sounded utterly depressed, and why wouldn't you be? This is a young coach in his first head job, and right now it's a failure to the point where he might have to be fired at the end of the season, or maybe if it gets bad enough, in the middle of it, to send a message to donors and boosters and prospective recruits that this is not what Purdue football is going to be. Not only have they lost momentum, Jay Lehman said something to this effect with Jeremy on Monday. Not only did the momentum stop, but they've actually lost a whole bunch of it to boot. And they're in a far worse place than they've been since Darrell Hazel. I mean, that's pretty incredible to only do that 5 games into the season. Now, of course, it's football. They could come together, have one great game, and come out of here with an upset. Even Kelly Ford ratings, which are kind of a metrics-based thing, we'll look at Illinois and say there's a 90% chance that Illinois wins this game. They aren't going to say 95. They aren't going to say 100. 90%, which is what they basically gave Penn State to beat Illinois at home. And we hung with Penn State. So if you want to go by that measure, sure, they got a chance. One more thing, too, flipping back to Illinois and why I feel good about this, and sorry for the scattershot kind of method here. Bye week. I mentioned the revenge game thing earlier. I think the bye week came at a perfect time after a perfect kind of loss, where it wasn't a dejecting loss in some ways because you hung, but it was also a loss that served you a little slice of humble pie. You weren't there yet. Like, you're good, you aren't great. And I would like to think that where this program's at in year 4 under Bret Bielema, that there's still enough of an anger and a bite, that underdog role that you have to play until you frankly have earned the ability to not be the underdog, where you go into this Purdue game and you can't be that puffed out of a chest as if you were Alabama going into Vanderbilt, which is another example that, yeah, anything can happen on a college football Saturday. But I don't think there's going to be anything from this Illinois team taking this game for granted. And after a bye week, you'd like to think that some of those things that needed tweaking were tweaked, whether that be the interior line. And if that's a personnel change or schematic change, I don't know. But I feel good about the tackles. If we can just get the interior going a little bit, then I feel good about everything else offensively. You're starting to see Fagan look really good. It just Penn State is not the best team to really get hot against. Josh McCray's look good. The run game is there. It's right there as long as you get the interior working a little bit, especially before Michigan. You'd like to feel a little bit better about it. And then the defensive side of it, that defensive run, the run defense, let me say, that was a terrible game against Penn State. And the linebackers didn't help, but at the same time, the linebackers were getting offensive linemen plowing into them sometimes as well, because the defensive line wasn't holding up their end of the bargain. Was that just simply a case of being outmatched, or did it expose a big weakness? Well, guess what? You got a bye week. And hopefully, I know recruiting was a big point of emphasis for it, but hopefully you were able to fix or address some of those things in time for the Purdue game. Here's what I like long-term about this game landing on this week. After the bye week, I think it allows you an opportunity to really get your wheels back under you, to really go into the Michigan game feeling great about yourself. I think this game, I mean, talk about fortuitous scheduling. Didn't think this before the season because I thought Purdue would just be okay, and I know our recent history against them. I remember before the season thinking, there's no way we're beating them. That's just how it is. I was going down that sort of abyss that fans do when you just seemingly can't beat anybody. Well, now we've watched the games. We've seen Purdue against other FBS teams, including a Wisconsin team that I don't think is as good as you are. Beat them 52-6. Beat them like a drum. And how good is Notre Dame? Well, they're better than you. I mean, Notre Dame, despite the Northern Illinois loss, is still a pretty good team. But that was at Purdue, and that was to the tune of 66-0. If it isn't Indiana State, this Purdue team is not competing. They just aren't. And what that tells me is this is the kind of game like the Bears just had against Carolina. It's a get-right game. It's a feel-good-about-yourself game. It's a get-reps for guys kind of game. It's a stay-healthy kind of game, maybe most importantly of all. Now, if that sounds arrogant for an Illini fan that's lost 7 of 8 and, 14 of 15 or something ridiculous, 13 of 15 to Purdue, I understand. It has been mind-boggling and very frustrating to continually find yourself in the short end of this so-called rivalry to a football program that had some good years under Jeff Brom, but you'd like to think you can be better than Purdue. Well, guess what? That's not even been the case. It's been the complete inverse. They've been much better than you, and head-to-head, they've owned you. I hate that. I want it to end. So there is that little element of angstiness and jumpiness, like, please, guys, don't screw this up. You got to beat them because I can't take one more of these losses. And yes, I mentioned the word biblical. This would be a biblically bad loss if they did, in fact, lose this game. It would take all the wind out of the sails before Michigan, and I don't think you would generate it back despite all the pomp and circumstance. It would be a shell-shocking kind of loss. We can admit that. So go do what you got to do. And if you were to ask me right now, what's your prediction? Let's say 34-10, 34-13. No, not 52-6, not 66-0. Yeah, Purdue might get a touchdown. That wouldn't make me think anything less of this Illini defense. I don't need perfection. I do think they cover. I think 19.5 right now is the spread. Purdue hasn't gotten nearly that close since Oregon State, and I think even then it was a garbage touchdown. No, like 34-13. Let's go with that. And hey, if it's 52-3, then I'm happy as a clam. And I would love to go out to the tailgate midway through the third quarter and just sort of revel in the fact that we are killing Purdue inside and they're done. And Ryan Walters is going to get fired. And I know that's schadenfreude. I shouldn't wish ill on anybody, but what the hell? 34-13. That's reasonable, isn't it? We should be able to do that against this Purdue team. I think the key thing is get a couple scores in the first quarter, all right? Whether that's 10-0 or 14-3, just show that we're going to move the ball on these guys. And then all of a sudden that forces Hudson Card into throwing it more than they probably like to. And what's your strength on defense? Your secondary. Lean into that. Hopefully that helps you with the run defense as well. Let Matthew Bailey kind of be a, linebacker in all but name. And just look good, because a good football team beats this Purdue team handily. And I think this Illinois team is, in fact, good. So we shall see. They got some cool helmets from the 60s, the ones with the numbers on it, the ones they wore, I believe, for the 2008 stadium rededication game, or when they opened the West Balcony in the West Main again. And it's Hall of Fame weekend, right? So I'm pretty sure that some other guys, I think Robert Holcomb is going to be there, and a few others are getting inducted as well. So you got this sort of calm before the proverbial storm of Michigan. Of course, you want to set that up by winning this game. And style points would be nice. I don't need them. But I do think that what heartens me going into a game like this, I do feel confident that we have a good coaching staff. And I say that because even in a game like Penn State that could have gotten away from you, I think good coaching goes a long way in avoiding a blowout loss, in finding a sort of identity that's going to keep you close against really good teams and often find you in the winning end against lesser teams than you. It just seems like Bret Bielema has found a pretty good mix from position coaches and the surprising emergence, let's say, of Aaron Henry, or the second-year improvement of Aaron Henry, fielding what looks to be just a solid defense. And that's all I could have asked for. I think they're solid, and I think solid is enough in this Big Ten against this schedule to go 8-4 or maybe 9-3, which leads me to the question that I asked in the listener mailbag today. And hello to Kirpnos. Your book's coming Thursday. Excellent. Hope you enjoy it. And hello, Stephen Colbert, celebrity in the house. All right. Listener mailbag question asked, with these 4 games ahead, what will Illinois' record be? Now, the 4 games, just a quick reminder: Purdue, Michigan, at Oregon, Minnesota. The record of 3-1 and 2-2 by far got the most responses. 3-1, 47% of respondents think Illinois is going to go 3-1 in the next 4. I'd imagine the majority of them think the loss, of course, would be at Oregon. And why not? I know they didn't look great in their first 2-3 games. It took them a little bit to get warmed up. They're really good. They're Penn State good. I think they're better than Penn State because they actually have a quarterback worth a damn. No offense, Drew Aller, who bores me to tears. He's just big. Not impressed with him. Dylan Gabriel, a little bit different. He's pretty good. 2-2. That's 45% of you. So let's call it an even split. And I've been waffling between those two as well. 3.5% of you said 4-0. Oh, my God. And 3.9% said 1-3. I didn't put 0-4. 1, because I couldn't fit a 5th response there. 2, I didn't want to be negative. And 3, boy, would that be shocking. So why even speak that into existence? Let's just let that exist in the ether and not really even acknowledge it. Let's start with Ethan here. Hello, Ethan. Probably seen the lots on Saturday. I selected 4-0 because I didn't actually read who we were playing. Oh, I see. Well, yeah, Oregon's big, but Ethan continues. That Oregon game in Eugene is going to be very tough, but honestly, I like having them 3rd in this quadrant. I think we'll continue to improve, and we might actually have a chance to win, but we will certainly compete. And if we can leave Oregon with a win, we're going to be in the CFP. Also, is the dual bye week new this season? I missed that change. I thought you only got 2 byes if you play a week 0 game. I think it is, Ethan. I used to think that was the same case with a week 0, but the 2 bye weeks is great. I know Jay Lehman talked about it listen, if you're a starter, as Jay Lehman said, you love the bye week. This is time for you to get your legs under you. Just feel good again. I would imagine that after a 4 or 5 game stretch, you're toast. So another reason why I like this game, and I like facing a Purdue team that has been going on the road at Wisconsin, at Oregon State, losing at home to Nebraska in the middle of that, and then Notre Dame before that. They are in the middle of a slog. And then they play Oregon on Friday night, next Friday night in West Lafayette. Dear Lord, that's going to be awful. Okay, Gopher Forever. I got to give him credit as an English teacher. This was somewhat embarrassing. I used the wrong version of there. I meant to use Their, and Gophers Forever corrected me. So thank you, Gophers. I'm not a grammar Nazi, but I appreciate you pointing that out. From Evan W. I think they go 2-2 in the stretch, but the way they get 2-2 surprises us. Well, Evan, that would be something like, listen, if they lose to Purdue, they aren't beating Michigan or Oregon. I don't think. That seems like a stretch. So if it were to surprise us, I think you are looking at they beat Purdue and they beat Oregon. Because the thing is, winning or losing to Michigan or Minnesota wouldn't shock me in either direction. I think those games are essentially coin flips, both of them. And that's why it's difficult for me to go 3-1, because I feel like you win one, you lose the other. But interesting, Evan. All right, this is from Clayton. 4-0 isn't happening. 3-1 is certainly possible. 2-2 should be the floor. I think team health going into in many games is key. I think that's a good point, Clayton. I don't think the 4-0 will happen. I will watch the Oregon game with a what the hell kind of mindset. And if you, for whatever reason, win your next two, then that takes on even a heightened level of importance, because then you would effectively be playing for a college football playoff spot. I mean, are you kidding me? Like, it'd be right there for you, which is insane. 3-1 possible. 2-2 should be the floor. I would agree with 2-2 should be the floor, because based on how you're playing, I think you're still better than Minnesota, regardless of what happened against USC on Saturday. Big win for PJ Fleck. And that's what his teams can do. They can lull the opponent to sleep. They damn near did it at Michigan. And I don't know if this is more of an indictment of Michigan or USC, or if it's more of praise for Minnesota, but this is what they do, and I don't think they're any different than any PJ Fleck team. They'll go 7-5. And that's a credit to him, because his floor is a lot higher with his style of play, and I think he's a solid coach. If not super exciting, he's solid. His record would bear that out. But I like your history against Minnesota. I think that while past isn't always precedent, I think that you're better than you were last year, and it's hard for me to say Minnesota's better than they were last year. And you're at home again. And I just think about the way that game against Minnesota went 2 years ago, when they had a better quarterback in Tanner Morgan. I can't even name the Gophers quarterback. Who is it? I mean, I know he beat USC, and credit to that, but it just seems like a favorable matchup for Illinois. So, boy, you mentioned the health. I think that's another factor here. If you're healthy going into Michigan and Minnesota, I think you certainly win one of those games, which is why you say 2-2 should be the floor. I would agree with that. From the Tomahawk, likely 2-2, but hopefully 3-1. From Banana Champagne, 2-2 is likely the case. I could see 3-1 with Michigan kind of melting down now. So far, the season has gone according to expectations. Man, I don't know. I think they've been above expectations, but Banana Champagne continues. Oregon and Michigan were the two likely losses. Kansas and Nebraska were 50-50 to me, and we won those coin flips. Oh, I see you're saying Banana Champagne. I just don't think Michigan can be considered a likely loss anymore. I'm going to go through the Kelly Ford ratings in a bit to give you kind of the odds of winning games according to their analysis. But I think from last time I checked, it was a 48% chance to beat Michigan. It's literally a coin flip. So the 50-50 games you talked about, Banana Champagne, with Kansas and Nebraska, and those did feel like coin flips. Though Nebraska, I think that's a really impressive win. I know that they have not been spectacular against Purdue, though they were in the second half against Purdue. And the Rutgers game, 14-6? I don't know what teams are going to go into Nebraska and win. Now, I don't know how many tough games they have at home. I think UCLA and Wisconsin are the only remaining ones. But if they go on the road and beat Indiana, let's say, which I think that's going to be a hell of a game, then, yeah, I think Nebraska's looking at a 7 or 8 win season. So to me, that's a quality win at a really tough place to play. I think Michigan's a coin flip now. And apparently so is Minnesota. From Elena, and I say both just to make sure I get one of those right. So one day you can correct me. No way we win at Oregon, and I think there's a better chance of beating Michigan than Minnesota 2-2. Interesting point. I mean, I understand that. And because I think this team is good and not great, I tend to lean 2-2 like you and many others do. I just still feel like Michigan's going to be tough. Well, duh. They're Michigan. They're bigger. They're stronger than you are. They're more talented still, though I think there's going to be a pretty quick drop-off because I just don't buy Sharon Moore as a head coach. I don't. But then I go back and forth on that and think all the circumstantial things around that game lead me to think that, wait a second, like it's predestined. You're going to win that thing. And I said it before the season, and then the season started, and I said, no, I can't actually double down on that. No, we'll probably lose to Michigan, and that's okay. But now that we've seen them play, I don't know. You're going to come out wanting so badly to win that game. More than them, I would think. And not to say that it's as simple as who wants it more gets it. But sometimes I think it is. In a game where it's essentially a coin flip. And if you can go into that game 5-1, like you should if you take care of business this weekend, you got the win behind you. You got a sold-out crowd. You got so many things going your direction. Now, the Illini fan, the pessimistic Illini fan, which is understandable to be given our history, would say, nope, but you see, we're going to get the rug pulled out from under us against Michigan. Yeah, maybe so. So what do I think? Here's the deal. I can't quite leap to 3-1, though I would not at all be surprised if they do go 3-1, at which point you would be 7-2 going into your final 3-game stretch. And that would be pretty awesome, I mean, to say the least. I still think 6-3 would be pretty damn good as well because I think you can win your last 3 games. Michigan State at home, Rutgers on the road, which to me is like Minnesota, and then Northwestern at Wrigley. I think going 6-3 into your last 3, you were still in fantastic shape for a Citrus Bowl, something like that. Maybe ReliaQuest again. Music City Bowl at the worst, and I'd love to spend New Year's in Nashville. Listen, I don't need college football playoff, but if you win the next 2, at least you can kind of have some fun going into Oregon talking about it. It's a cool place to be in, though, because by starting 4-1, you've allowed yourself to have some of these conversations, and they aren't outlandish at the moment. Still, I think this is a good, not great team. I think that the defensive line, while they showed signs of improvement against Nebraska, we saw against a Penn State that, you know what, there is no Johnny Newton, there's no Keith Randolph, which means that teams can run the ball, will still have some success against Illinois. And whether that's Michigan or whether that is Minnesota at home, it's hard for me to say that we're going to win both of those games. So to me, of course, it's essential to beat Purdue. And I think you do beat Purdue, and I think you look good doing it, as most FBS teams, or all FBS teams, have against Purdue this year. I think that continues. To me, it just seems like a coin flip with those 2 home games. And Oregon, if you can hang, I just feel good about the long-term health of this program if that's what you do. If you just hang, let alone win, then we have a completely different discussion on this podcast, which I would love to broach. So I'm going to go 2-2. And it's not a cynical 2-2. It's just this is the reality of where you're at in year 4. It's a good program. I don't think it's great yet. I don't think this team has the high-level talent of 2 years ago, even though the depth is better. I think almost certifiably better. And I think just as far as this process of stabilizing things, it's not that I want 8-4 more than 10-2. Of course I want 10-2 more. But I kind of want to know what it's like if we don't get the 10-2 season, to experience a season where it's not red hot start, big slump, up, down. How do I feel about this? Imagine if this team starts 4-1, and then they go 2-2 in the next 4 games, and they find themselves at 6-3, and then they go 2-1 in the last 3, which they should, if not 3-0, and then they finish 8-4. That is top to bottom a good season. Scratch that. I'll say very good, because I said before the season, 7-5, I would be over the moon. 8-4 is right there if you just play steady football. And to me, that's what a Bret Bielema team tends to do. Problem with steady football is you don't often get blowouts. So in these Michigan, in these Minnesota games, to say, yep, we're going to win both of them, yeah, I think we totally can. I'm going to go into those games thinking I like our chances. But Football is one of those games. It can give and it can take away just as easily. And whether it be a bad bounce or an untimely turnover, listen, that I just want to not caution myself and Illini fans, but say, hey, this team is good. I don't know if they're great. And therefore, if they go 2-2 in the next 4, that's still all right. That's a good October given the circumstances. Though I guess Minnesota technically is November 2nd. But I digress. But isn't it fun to talk about this, though? I mean, we can have this legit conversation about, are we going to win 8 or 9 games? At this point, you're almost at a place where if you won 7, you'd say, well, you slipped late. And 7-5 would still be, for Illini football, a pretty good season. But real quick, what I want to end with here is the Kelly Ford ratings, which is just a really fun website to kind of peruse through because it has breakdowns of all your opponents. And here's what we have for the remaining schedule. Purdue is the 110th best team in the nation, according to Kelly Ford rankings. Central Michigan, by comparison, was 116. They have the 103rd defense, Purdue, 102nd offense, and 75th best special teams. Meanwhile, you have the 65th best offense, which I think can improve, especially after Saturday. 26th best defense, which is the surprise of the year. And the third best special teams, which I think, let's say that Purdue keeps this game close. I think sometimes that can be the difference. So if Purdue comes out and plays their best game of the year and they're hanging in there in the second half, don't be surprised if special teams play is the thing that ultimately turns it. I want to go back to 2019 when Lovey and his team made a bowl game and Rutgers hung in the first half. And then Illinois blew it open in the second. If we go into halftime, we're only up 6 or 10 against Purdue. Okay, I understand some unease creeping in, but just wait it out. Nebraska, the second half, then they blew the doors open. Wisconsin, it even took a late touchdown in the first half. These are still Big Ten football players on Purdue. I don't want to hit the red alert button too early. So 90% chance, according to Kelly Ford, to beat Purdue. I'd agree with that. Get it done. Michigan, 43%. So not 48, but 43% chance. Why? Well, they had the 15th best defense, according to Kelly Ford. So they looked a little more suspect against Washington. 76th best offense. Makes sense. 5th best special teams. They don't miss field goals. It's just maddening. Of course, the one thing they always had, just like Jake Moody and now whoever the guy is, they don't miss field goals. Though, did they miss one against Washington? I forget. But regardless, that's still a Michigan team that you'll have to play pretty well to win that game. Now, I think there's a lot of reasons to think Illinois will show up and play one of their best games of the season that day. It's just, I'm telling you, there's just something in the air. But again, I can't sit here and say, yep, we're going to win that game. And I won't go into the stadium saying, yep, we're going to win it. I'm going to go in saying, all right, let's see what happens. And if they do win, I was texting my friends, top 5 day of my life. And they're like, well, what are you talking about? Like, Michigan might not even be ranked then. I was like, hold on a second. We're talking 100th anniversary of the stadium, throwback Red Grange uniforms, Michigan, and still Michigan. Going to have a bunch of Michigan family down. I love them, but I really want to beat them. I really do. And in year 4 of Bret Bielema, I think that game would take on special significance. So, yeah, there's so many things around that game. But we will broach that more in detail next week. Okay, Oregon, 11% chance. Fair. That was, I think, the exact percentage they gave you for Penn State. And I think it's pretty spot on. I think those two teams are similar. Oregon just has a better quarterback, and they're more explosive offensively. So I don't love our chances in that game, but that's why you play the games. I presume that would be an evening game on October 25th or 26th, whichever. Minnesota at home, 53% chance. Minnesota has improved according to the Kelly Ford ratings. They're 48th in the country to your 43. So essentially a pick'em game. I think that you still should feel better about that game than Michigan. I still feel that way. Bye week. So I'm sticking with 2-2 for that stretch, but again, 3-1. I'm right on the precipice of wanting to say that I can't quite pull that trigger. Last 3 games of the year, Michigan State at home, they're 68th in the nation according to K Ford. Bad offense, pretty solid defense. Your defense is still ranked better, and they have good special teams, but you got a 67% chance to win that game according to Kelly Ford. At Rutgers, 42% chance according to Kelly Ford, and 77% chance to beat Northwestern at Wrigley Field. Neutral site game. They have an absolutely terrible offense, though they did score a few points against Indiana. So there you go. What is my final prediction? I'm going to say 8-4. I just think the way that football unfolds and the way that you could lose a game that you don't necessarily want to, I'm sticking 8-4, where anything over that is an absolutely monumental success, and 8-4 is still a very successful season, where you should feel very good about the future prospects of Bret Bielema and this program. All right, I think that's all I got for today. So, quick reminder before I sign off: in Cancun next week. Next Friday morning, we'll do a podcast. And I know that's late in the week. I wish I could get one out sooner in the build-up to the 100th anniversary game. But, hey, man, fall break, got to enjoy it. And I cannot wait to get to Cancun. All-inclusive experience, not doing a damn thing except sitting by the pool, having some drinks, and enjoying delicious food. That's it. So that'll be my next week. And hopefully all the hurricanes, my God, it's just that seemingly never ends for the people in Florida. I don't know if that affects Mexico, but what it does affect is our schedule, and that just means we'll be light in terms of material next week. But again, you have a plethora of options for Illini sports coverage, and a lot of good coverage at that. So before I get out of here, if you're on the lot on Saturday, come say hi, lot 31. And same thing for the Michigan game. Love seeing people. I might have some extra books. I'm not entirely sure. And trying to work on maybe lining up a special, not appearance, but meeting someone pretty cool on Saturday. Working on that, and an email came through as I was recording this. So I'm going to sign off and see what this email said from the William Morris Agency. Oh, boy. That's big time. So for Hamilton Walkers, Steak, Seafood, and Spirits in downtown Champaign, the host of our book event. We appreciate that, but also a great pregame spot for Illini basketball and football games. Comfort plates like their hamburger, which is $21, includes fries. One of the best hamburgers in town. That's a pretty damn good price. One note my wife made at Hamilton Walkers, too. She got a gin martini when we were there for the book event. I got an old-fashioned. We both remarked how the prices are incredibly reasonable. I mean, Chicago people would come down and say, how do you guys get a place like this for these prices? Hamilton Walkers is very affordable. So don't let the kind of high-end appearance of the place, because it is a classy joint, don't let that fool you. I mean, this is a place that the food is, of course, terrific, and the drinks, I think, are the best in town beyond the old-fashioned, but it's very affordable. So check it out. Pre-game spot as well. Don't forget that at Hamilton Walkers in downtown Champaign. State Farm agent Brian Hansen online at brianismyguy.com for life, auto, home, business renters, you name it. We've been trusting Brian for, I think, 5 years coming up now. And he will continue to be our insurance guy because, listen, the customer service is great. Him and his staff always so quick to get back to us. That's brianismyguy.com. Also, Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing, your home's best friend. Give them a call at 217-841-4728 and get your furnace checked today. It's getting cold, 30 degrees. Some mornings next week, so don't waste your time. That's Dogtown Heating, Air, and Plumbing at 217-841-4728. And Owen Builders LLC online at owenbuildersllc.com. And let's see here. I got a couple more comments here from Brad and Mr. P before I get here. Sorry, guys, I didn't get to this. From Brad, Purdue fans probably want Illinois to win 52-6 also would force Walters out. I was thinking, Brad, one good thing about this weekend, often when Purdue is here, we get a bunch of Purdue fans to come over. I don't think they're going to be traveling for this one. They're always nice. I have no beef with Purdue fans. But it's just frustrating when you lose to them, and then you see them walking around Lot 31 afterwards. They're happy as can be, and you're thinking, why did we lose to them again? So I don't think we're going to see too many of them. It'd be like us traveling to away games in Tim Beckman's first year. Why would we do that? Also from Mr. P, sorry to not get to this earlier, pummel Purdue and raid the roster on some of the recruits Walters won, chance to get way stronger. That's true, and in fact, it looks like there will be a 4-star cornerback who decommitted from Purdue this week, who will be visiting us this week. So if it's a little salt in the wound, I'm okay with that. Hey, man, it's college football. It's high-level college football. We aren't trying to be friends with Purdue. We're trying to kick their ass, and let's start with that on Saturday. I hope we do that. I think we can do that. Let's do that for the love of God, because I'm sick of losing these guys. All right, everybody. Have a great rest of your week, a beautiful week ahead, and a beautiful Saturday for Illini football. Let's get to 5-1 and set up something pretty special next week against Michigan. It is the 200 level. All right, YouTube, thanks for tuning in on a Thursday. What day is it? Good God. I got parent-teacher conferences this week, so my days of the week are all messed up. Thank you for tuning in on a Tuesday afternoon into evening. And again, it'll be a while before I see you again, but I appreciate you tuning in. and have a good rest of your week and a good Saturday. See you, everybody.